So you want to make a movie or a short film, and you have a great idea and you're just waiting for someone to give you the money to go make it. Or you're a great actor and you're just waiting for someone to give you that breakout role. Or you're a screenwriter and you want to write the great American screenplay. Or you're a camera operator or whatever. I mean, fill in the blank. And you're waiting. But you don't have to wait any longer. Because what we're going to start doing right here, right now, is help you understand how to do it yourself. Welcome to the inaugural edition of DIY Film Guy, where hopefully you'll get the information and inspiration you need to create that dream project you've been thinking about so hard. In this episode, we're going to start from the very beginning. We're going to start with story, because that's where it all starts and stops. Now, when I say DIY, I literally mean do it yourself, which means you're probably looking at a ultra low or no budget film to start with, and that's fine. So unless you're independently wealthy, that's where we're going to be. All right, so story in this case plays a very important role in ultra low budget filmmaking. Now, I'm going to take a little segue here and say, don't worry about starting with an ultra low film, ultra low budget or no budget film, because maybe you have this big dream of making this big movie, and the next Star Wars or Waterworld or whatever. We'll worry about making that later, because the same principles apply to this as they do that. Put that movie on the shelf and let's take a look at low or no budget filmmaking to start with. Now, why is that okay? Well, Roger Corman, who is arguably the king of the ultra low budget films in Hollywood, he actually wrote a book called How I Made 100 Films in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime. That's the one you want to pick that book up and emulate, because people like Ron Howard, James Cameron, Jack Nicholson owe their careers to Roger Corman, ultra low budget or no budget filmmaking. So don't worry about starting small. What you learn here will actually apply when you start trying to make the bigger films, okay? So with that in mind, let's talk about story. Now, it doesn't matter if you're making a Hollywood-sized budget film or a low or no budget film, it all starts and stops with story. You gotta have a great film starts with a great story. Now, why am I harping on story? Because the only way you get to make these films and get to make something that is low or no budget is to plan. And you can't plan if you don't have a story. See, in many people's minds, the story is the director's vehicle, the director's voice, or it's that actor's medium that shows their acting skills. But for starting out, you have to look at the story being the mainstay of what you're trying to do. It's the bottom line of planning. And the only way to make a film at this level and make it successful, make a decent film, is with planning. So out of your story is where everything is going to be found. The number of shooting days you're going to have, the props you're going to need, the actors you're going to need. All right, so let's start with story. And you're going to have to look at story now in terms of, okay, what do you have? What assets do you have? Robert Rodriguez, who made El Mariachi and has gone on to make great big Hollywood movies, even though he does it as an independent. We'll talk about that another time. Robert Rodriguez actually was a student at University of Texas and wound up selling his blood and plasma to make extra money. And he took all that money and actually I think was part of a medical study at the same time, took all that money, $7,000, $8,000, and made a film. And the reason he could do it at that budget level, and remember, back in his day, he shot on film. It's not like today where you can shoot on digital and have lower cost. He actually shot on film, so he had to spend money on developing film and buying film stock, whereas that's not your reality. The way he did it was, he said, okay, I'm going to do a story, and in my story, I know I have these assets. I have a friend. First of all, he had a lot of connections in Mexico, so that determined his location. So number one, his location was determined by his story. Number two, I have friends that have a bus, and I have friends that have some automatic weapons and things like that. Not real ones, but that are armorers and those kind of things. I have a friend that has a guitar case, and so he wrote this whole story using a student film, okay, a student actor, and then took all his assets and wrote a school bus into the story, wrote machine guns into the story, and guess what? It was all shot in Mexico. All right, so story is where it starts and stops. That's where planning starts and stops. Now, let's talk about planning for just a second. I have a friend, I won't say his name because he might be watching this, but this friend said, Chuck, I want to make a film. I have these assets and I want to make a film. And so he said, I think, if I could raise a few dollars over here, we could take these assets that I already have, shoot a few little other assets, blend them together and make a film. And I said, hey, that's a great idea. So go ahead. So he starts writing the script. Well, when the script was finished, it was an epic length film that took place across 7 years in locations starting in ancient Rome and ending up in Jerusalem. And it was nowhere near the size and scope that he'd wanted to do, and now his budget was completely blown. Now, the good news is he was in love with the script, he loved the story, it's a good story, and so he's trying to go the route of raising more money to make this movie. The point being is, if you're planning from the very beginning to have your story that's a low or no budget, you got to stick with that. You've got to go with these things like, okay, how many cast members do I have? See, there's two major budget killers. Number one is personnel. Number two is time. So if I have 10 actors in my script and I have to take 3 weeks to shoot it, then suddenly I'm blowing my budget and I'm making a larger film. So starting with your story, you want to have, as number one, as few actors as you can possibly have in as few locations as you can possibly have, because that's where you keep your size small. If I'm shooting 3 actors in 2 locations, then that helps my budget, because what's happening is I don't have to move location to location. I don't have 10 actors in a friend's house reminiscing about the high school days, and now we're going to go to the old high school and shoot in the old high school, and we're going to shoot in the old football field, and then we're going to go one guy very successful in his big house, and one guy's not so successful and he's got a small house. I mean, suddenly I'm moving all over the place, and that's killing my budget. What you want to do from your perspective right now in terms of story, think of a story and say, okay, do I have a couple of actors I can trust? Great, you do, good, that's a good start. Number 2, do I have, can I tell a story that's going to take place in a location, 1 location or 2 locations, so you don't have to move? Less people, less time, less man hours. So if I can tell a story in, for example, in a funeral home, and 2 brothers are lamenting the life that they had with their mom, and they're at the funeral home and talking about, reminiscing about times with their mom. Then I have a smaller crew, I have small actors, and I have few locations. Now you're using story as part of your planning to make your dream a possibility of no or low budget filmmaking. That's what I'm talking about. That's where we got to start, okay? So let me give you a practical example. In December of 2017, I released a novel called Personal Justice. And Personal Justice started out as a screenplay that we were going to do in January, but we had to push it into the fall of 2018. So it was already an existing script. And so when I wrote Personal Justice with my writing partner, Kay Landon, we literally sat down and said, okay, how can we minimize locations? How can we minimize actors? Just because every actor you pay is more money out of your budget, right? So there was literally a scene that takes place at a hotel where there's a party going on, and there's valet parking, and I wrote the scene so that the valet was not there when the key subject left the party, because I didn't want to have to pay that valet for screen time. And even though at this budget level, where you're probably talking about $200, that's $200 I put back in my pocket and toward the production to go on screen. And that's what you want to do, is you want your money to go on screen. You want the value of what you're doing to go on the screen, whether it's the television screen or the big screen. That's what you're trying to accomplish, okay? So the valet takes the keys from the hero of the story, going in, it doesn't say a word, and then coming out, the subject has to go rummaging through the valet pedestal, because I didn't want the valet to have to say, here's your keys, or can I get your car for you, ma'am, and spend money. That's the kind of thing we're talking about here. In story, you're saying, okay, how do I use the fewest people in the fewest locations? Because people in locations, again, the big money drain, okay? Not that they're not valuable. Actors, please don't be mad because I'm saying we don't need a lot of them. I'm just trying to keep your budget and keep your plan, give you ideas of how to plan this thing so that you can accomplish your goal of making that film or that short film for the budget you can afford. Just real quickly too, there is a third budget killer. Remember, we have people and time. Those are big budget killers. Third budget killer, by the way, is special effects. So unless you own a special effects company, don't do a film right off the bat, a low, no budget film with a lot of special effects, a lot of visual effects, because that's going to kill your budget. And yeah, so unless you're like George Lucas, who happens to own his own visual effects company, keep it to a minimum. And by the way, just so you know, George Lucas was helped into his career by a guy named Francis Ford Coppola, the guy that directed The Godfather. And Francis Ford Coppola was brought into the filmmaking industry by a guy named Roger Corman, we talked about earlier. Interesting, right? Roger Corman, B filmmaker, brings in Francis Ford Coppola, who gets an Academy Award for Godfather, who brings in George Lucas, who has, well, credits for days. And just an example, don't worry about making low or no budget films to start with. To recap, if you're going to create a low or no budget project, it starts with containment. And containment takes planning, and planning comes from the story. So you have to write or come up with a story that is contained with few actors, few locations, which in the long run is going to mean fewer crew members and fewer dollars spent. All right? Now, I realize that story is kind of a nebulous term, so in upcoming episodes we're going to discuss things like screenwriting, so you can help write your screenplay, and preparation and pre-production, so you can do more to prepare. Because in planning, the more planning you get done in pre-production, the less money you can spend in production, or the better, let's say, you can spend money in production, okay? Thank you so much for coming by to visit us on the inaugural edition of the DIY Film Guy. Now, please write in the comments below that you liked it or didn't like it, what we could do better. Also in the comments below, please say, look, this is what I'd like to know about. Thanks for the story, Chuck, but I want to talk about this, that, or the other thing, and that'll help demystify the filmmaking process. Great. Please know that in future episodes, like I said, we're going to do screenwriting, we'll do directing, we'll do lighting, we'll do camera, we'll even do post-production. But in the comments below, please let us hear from you. It's very important we hear from you, because this is designed to help you fulfill your dreams and get your project done. Now, also in upcoming episodes, you can look for us doing interviews with other filmmakers, other guys that have done low or no budget films, and what they did, how they did it, tips and tricks that they used. So please, keep coming back week after week. Also, you can find us on Facebook. Our Facebook page is DIY Film Guy. Thanks for coming by. Hopefully you've got some great information and some inspiration to move you forward to creating your dream project. We'll see you next time.